Welcome, first-time listeners and returners to the Sports Deli, where we believe that less is more. Less stands for leadership, equality, education, empowerment, social, and sport issues. The Sports Deli is sponsored by Sport RX, the leader in sport prescription eyewear. Give them a buzz at 888-831-5817 and let them know the Sports Deli sent you for your 10% discount. Or if you order online, you can go to sportrx.com and enter the code DELI10. That's DELI10. If you want to send us an email, you can always do so to thesportsdeli@gmail.com, and you can DM us on Instagram at Mike Hootner and on Twitter at Michael Hootner. So grab your favorite deli sandwich or bagel and your favorite beverage, and let's do this together in the Sports Deli. We are joined by Etan Thomas, who even though he was born on April 1st, don't let him fool you. He shares a birthday with ESPN and ABC broadcaster Mark Jackson. He hails to us from the same hometown as Oklahoma product and University of Oklahoma legend, the late Wayman Tisdale. He played for Hall of Fame legendary Syracuse coach Jim Boeheim, national champion Carmelo Anthony, Hall of Famer Jim Brown, and the 47th President of the United States, Joe Biden. Thomas was drafted 12th overall in the 2000 NBA draft by the Dallas Mavericks, where he played with the likes of Michael Jordan after his comeback, KD, James Harden, and Russell Westbrook. He's a published poet, freelance writer, activist, motivational speaker, sports talk show host, and podcaster. He's been involved in marches against the Iraq War and helping with solutions against police brutality. He's been featured on PBS, CNN, MSNBC, and Meet the Press. He's going to be having a panel soon with WNBA players and former victims of police brutality while discussing the recent attacks on our capital and systemic racism. His mother was a teacher. He's a father, proud father, and married to his college sweetheart, Nicole Oliver, who also played ball at Syracuse. He's appeared with Barack Obama while campaigning for him during his historic run for president. And his book, We Matter, Athletes and Activism, he interviewed Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Bill Russell, Oscar Robinson, John Carlos, Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf, Craig Hodges, as well as family members of Trayvon Martin, Eric Gardner, Philando Castile, and he will discuss why their voices, even now, are still so important, if not more than ever. He has his own Etan Thomas Foundation, whose goal is to reach more than 50,000 youths and parents in numerous cities across the United States with positive messaging. Donovan McNabb, former NFL star, also played basketball with him at Syracuse. And when you had heart surgery, the late Kobe Bryant told you he was praying for you. You can find him at Etan Thomas. Etan is ETAN, EtanThomas.com. He has his own podcast, The Rematch with Etan Thomas, where everyone deserves a second chance. You can find him at basketballnews.com and on Instagram and Twitter at Etan Thomas 36, where on Instagram he has over 134,000 followers. Ton, welcome. Big warm welcome to the Sports Deli.
How you doing?
I'm good, man. It's an honor to talk to you, and it's important times for all of us. And
thank you for having me. You did your homework there. That was a fantastic intro.
We're honored that you're here. You got a lot going on. I want to rewind to your days in Oklahoma. I know you've shared this story before, but a lot of people probably haven't heard it, about how you got pulled over. You were racially profiled. So
I'm 16, going to a game against one of our biggest rivals, and I got pulled over by the police on one of the biggest intersections in Tulsa, in North Tulsa, where I grew up. You know, in the 90s, which was kind of routine. Whenever they would pull over young black men, they would have you get out of the car and sit on the ground. So then they said, can you pop the trunk? And they opened my trunk and they picked up my Booker T. Washington high school bag, my gym bag. And they said, oh, he plays for Booker T. He was like, okay, that's why he looks familiar. And they slammed down, they threw it in there, slammed down. They all got in their cars and left. And the one guy, patted me, said, all right, stay out of trouble. And that was it. So I went to the game. I was late. I was pissed. You know what I mean? I remember that night, I didn't even sleep. Like I saw every hour of the clock. And after that, I was in speech and debate class. I didn't even want to go to school. You know what I mean? But I had one of those mothers, unless something is falling off, you're going to go to school.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was, my parents were divorced, so I was a single parent household. So a lot of the issues that I had, I dealt with them internally because I didn't want to bring any more stress to my mother. And so my speech teacher, Mr. Bland, goes by and hears me, and he pulls me into his office, and he says, everything that you're feeling now, everything that you're describing, he said, why don't you write a speech about that? And he said, you could take that to your first tournament coming up here soon. And I was like, I'll think about it. So then I went home, and it just poured out. And I wrote this amazing speech, and I put all my passion into it and everything that I was feeling. And I talked about, racism and, everything. I put it all in there. And I performed it at this first speech tournament, and I won. And I started getting a lot of attention for it. So then after that, I started getting a lot of people come up to me, guys like, hey man, thanks for, speaking up for us. That happens all the time, but they're not going to listen to us. You know what I mean? But they'll listen to you. So that's when I made the connection that, oh, okay. It's like a light bulb went off, that because of this basketball thing, they'll listen to me. You know what I mean? And I'll have their attention and they'll hear it. So that's when I made the connection. And that's when I really found my voice.
I've never seen in all the protests, that I've witnessed in my lifetime, as many white people out there. And some of the protests is more white people, barely see any African Americans, which really we need the white voices now in America to be speaking on this issue, because white men run this country still, unfortunately. And in the middle of one of our podcasts, I don't know if you saw it, but Crystal Robinson, she, literally in the middle of our podcast, is pulled over and racially profiled and ends up going to jail that night in the middle of our podcast. Because, I've gone on record a lot by saying this is a big white problem. And I didn't know this story that Stephen shared with you about James Harden recently. And I think it's important for people to understand that, because
Stephen Jackson doesn't mince words very often, so what you see is what you get. He saw in, James Harden how it hurt the overall movement of Black coaches. And I was glad that Stephen Jackson was very honest about that in our interview.
Yeah, it was powerful. If you haven't had a chance to listen to that, you should go to the rematch and listen to that podcast with Etan and Stephen. And
so there's just been this push for more Black head coaches, and there are coaches that we see in the coaching pool that have been waited for a long time to have an opportunity, and they haven't received one yet. Or you see a Black coach who has had success, like Mark Jackson, who had success, but then you don't see him again. Or Eddie Jordan, who was my coach. And, you see that on paper what they achieved. And it's kind of, mind-boggling of why they don't get another chance after that. So, it's an interesting topic. I don't have the answer to it, but.
And so I've been very critical of Tom Brady. I even, as recently as yesterday, tried to go anywhere to find anything that he's talked about with Black Lives Matter and systemic racism and the attacks on the Capitol. I can't find one quote. I can't find one tweet, nothing. And, I've heard people say, well, he does things in the locker room and he helped Antonio Brown. And man, it's just one of the things that when you're the face of something, right, especially as a white man, I can't tell you how, because I'm from Michigan, right? I'm from Detroit. And I was the only white guy in the basketball team, and I went to an integrated high school, and I saw a lot of this stuff growing up, and I didn't realize how, passionate I was about this stuff until we started the podcast. And to see him continuing to do video after video about the playoffs and about the back and forth with the trash talking, which is great under normal circumstances. But it's Doug Williams said it best when he came on our podcast. Okay. If a white guy in the locker room stands up for an African American or a Black or a brown cause, that is something that African Americans, I don't care if you ended up being the biggest choker in the history of that team, they will never forget you. Of course. And I think Tom is missing out on the chance of a lifetime to be something way more than a 6-time champion. So I don't know how you feel about that, but it is so frustrating to not hear him say one word. Jerry Jones, there's others, Brett Favre, his ridiculous comments, Jay Cutler, there's others.
Well, it's interesting. This past summer, after Drew Brees' comments, he was checked by his teammates.
Yep.
And they were very passionate about why his words were so dangerous. One of the things that I did in my book, We Matter, Athletes and Activism, I interviewed like Steve Kerr and Mark Cuban. And, I wanted to ask them, specifically why they use their voices the way that they do. And I think that what people have to understand is when they do, when Popovich, when Stan Van Gundy, who I've interviewed for my upcoming book that I'm working on now, and I asked them the same thing. There are going to be people in white America who only can hear it if Stan Van Gundy says it, or if Popovich says it, or Steve Kerr says it. They won't hear it if anyone that looks like me says it, no matter who that person is.
Standpoint, but just as Stephen educated James, I hope somebody educates Tom, before he leaves the league. And talk about Coach Boeheim. Obviously he's been doing this for a long time. He's his kids playing for him, and he's been renowned for recruiting bigs. And so how was it? Because everyone gets better when they go to Syracuse. Obviously they're known for the 2-3 zone. But talk about Coach Boeheim and his influence on you, and obviously went to Syracuse where Jim Brown went, and a lot of other famous people went. But what was your time there? Because the Carrier Dome, I used to work camp there, and I love going there. Yeah, it's there's no play. I've been to Cameron Indoor, I've been to West Virginia, I've been to Kansas State, San Diego State. There's nothing like the Carrier Dome, man. Nothing like it.
Well, I had an incredible time there, though. Just the growth, because you're young. This is your first time away from your parents. You're on your own, and you're learning yourself. So in 4 years, and I stayed all 4 years, there was a lot of growth in me, of course, on the court, but really off the court as well.
And so you get drafted, you play with Jordan, and you play with a lot of good players. How come the Wizards have never turn that corner? Obviously you had some issues with Doug Collins, and we don't necessarily need to get into that, but it's just more about what does it take to be a successful coach in the NBA, and it's such a fragile situation to succeed at the level. There's so many good players now.
Well, for us, we kept running into LeBron. It was very
right,
plain and simple. It's not like we did anything wrong those years. We played well. Sometimes we played like great games. He just took over at the end and then beat us like on the last set. There's so many buzzer beaters that I remember from those series. So that was really it.
Yeah. And so, you sort of talked about white privilege, right? So what we're talking about a little bit is white privilege. There's a difference between racism and white privilege.
Right. So the what you're referring to is on Amtrak. I live in DC, and the Amtrak going back and forth to New York is a quick train, nice and comfortable. So I was coming back to DC from New York, and so I get all the way to the front, and there's a white lady who is sitting there, and so it's just customary, you know what I mean? I just asked, "So, excuse me, is there anybody sitting here next to you? Can I sit here?" And she said, "Nope, somebody's sitting here." She moved her bag. I was like, "All right, no problem." All right, so then I went over like right diagonal and just sat with the person that was there, like diagonally from her. Literally, it was like 5 seconds later, a white guy came up to her, and he walked by, he said, "Hey, can I sit here?" And she was like, "Oh yeah, sure, let me move my stuff." And I was like, and I looked, I was like, "Wait a minute." And it's like she when she saw that I saw what happened, I was like, "You just told me that somebody was sitting there." And I was like, it can't be because I'm black, right? Are you like afraid of me sitting next to you? Like, just honestly tell me. And then she snapped when I said that. And she said, "Don't pull that race card stuff with me. I had a black boyfriend in college." And she started going. I was like, "What does any of that have to do with what I'm talking about?" And the conductor came up, and he was walking up, and he looked at me. He said, "Hey," because a lot of conductors, they're from DC. You know what I mean? So he's like,
Exactly.
hey, Etan Thomas, I remember for the Wizards, man. I was a big fan of you and stuff like that.
Mm.
And then so I turned to her, I was like, was there something you was gonna ask him?
Right.
And then she just looked at me. And I just, so basically I just told that story on Facebook. And then it went viral. Like I didn't, you post stuff on,
right.
I didn't expect that story to go. That wasn't like a, you know what I mean? Like that major of a story. But what everybody was reacting to, they used words like microaggressions and that everyday racism that's not, and that people can relate to. So it just went everywhere.
Well, it speaks to white America again about how they think it doesn't apply to them. And you talked about being anti-racist, and because it's not just enough not to be racist, right? You have to, in your own homes. I shared it on Instagram and Facebook the other day. My grandma is in the the den. We're watching TV every night. She's visiting from Detroit, right? She just lost her husband of 71 years. She's white, obviously. We're Jewish. And she said, Mike, is that woman yelling on television because she's a Schwarza? I said, Grandma, you can't say that. You can't say is somebody yelling because they're black.
No, got you.
And I said, you can't say is she yelling because she's a woman either. I said, you can say is she yelling because she's angry. Right. So, some fast forward 2 years and Colin takes a knee, and Bill Curry come on our podcast and said, this guy was legit. If you don't think that he was blackballed, you're completely in denial. And the fact that he hasn't gotten a job since then just speaks to exactly that, being tone deaf. So I don't know, talk a little bit about Colin and the effects of that. You have some books in the background there, obviously, Malcolm X, Muhammad Ali, Bob Marley. You got some amazing books behind you there.
So Colin Kaepernick is like etched himself in history. I think that people will have more of an appreciation for Colin Kaepernick decades to come.
So, do you believe in, I'm Jewish, right? We had reparations, and I've gone on record in saying I believe that low socioeconomic African Americans should have reparations. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, that's not even a question. I mean, we talk about, and I used to have this conversation with people all the time in school in Syracuse. And, I asked a lot of Jewish people, what were your reparations, after the Holocaust? And, when they say, well, yeah, we had no place to go. And I was like, I get it. I understand. I was like, so what was your reparations? I was like, you got an entire country. You know what I mean? And I'm not even getting to the point of who was there first and whose land it was. I'm not even getting into that part. I'm just saying that you received reparations with the backing of the United States forever, even going to today. So to relate that to, my ancestors here in this country who were just told, okay, you're free now, and that's it. That's all. You're free now. You're no longer a slave. Go ahead and be merry. And that's all. And that, you can't look at that situation and say, realistically and honestly, that was fair. I remember when Bernie Sanders said that he was going to form a coalition to study something. I was like, what do you have to study? You don't know what happened? You know what I mean? Like what?
Ridiculous.
Do you have to learn what happened? I don't understand what the whole coalition is about.
Start a 401k. And by the time they're 18, they can use it for education. They can use it for small business. They could use it to buy a house. And then that's the way we can bridge the gap between the economic disparities in this country, because it's literally ridiculous. Whites make 6 times as much money as their African-American counterparts with the same degrees, and women, it's worse still. Yeah. So it's just people that are out there listening to this, whether you believe in reparations or not, you can't argue systemic racism and the economic disparities in this country. So, you might do yourself some good by educating yourself about why we're talking about this and why it's important.
And the frustrating part is when you hear things like, well, you have to pull yourself up by your own bootstraps and things of that nature. And you're like, but that's not what happened with y'all. Right. You were giving boots, you were giving straps, you were giving everything else.
Exactly.
So you can't make that comparison. And, when you start off, I mean, I can go on and on about that. But yeah, and I remember having those conversations in class. And a lot of Jewish people saying, I never thought of it like that. You know what I mean? Like, why do I have to make that comparison in order for it to resonate with you?
Because education is
Yes.
completely ass backwards. That's why
Yes.
we learn more about math than we do about
Right.
sensitivity training and diversity training. Like
Definitely.
that, it's ridiculous. And share your thoughts on how much of a slap in the face this most recent incident was to African Americans.
Well, it was. We were all looking at everything that happened last Wednesday and just amazement. To be honest with you, I can't even put into words what you know, like what was happening. And I was like, where?
If that doesn't exemplify the double standard and the two sets of laws in this country, I don't know what else does.
You can't look at that and then pretend that white privilege doesn't exist. I remember when Freddie Gray was murdered in Baltimore.
Yep.
And these were kids. These were all high school students. And right. they cut off the transportation, so they couldn't do the bus or whatever they usually use, and then they were all walking, and the police were there waiting for them, literally waiting for them. And I remember it was like they said somebody threw a plastic bottle or a rock. It was one of those two, and then they just. Everybody, it was just, and these were kids, literally 15, 16, 17-year-old kids, because they were all high school. And so to see that compared to what happened at the US Capitol, it was just amazing, even though we know, you know what I mean? But still to see it happen again and again, that was really, you know, because there's a lot of white people who get offended at the even notion of white privilege. Or they say things like, okay, you know, well, I didn't grow up with money. Like, well, white privilege ain't got nothing to do with money. Money has nothing to do with this. Because, you know, I'm a former NBA player. I have money. That's not the issue. You know, when I get pulled over by the police, they don't care how much money I have.
Exactly.
You know, they don't care what I have in my bank account. Money has nothing to do with this. And after seeing what happened at US Capitol, you know, you can't deny white privilege. I don't see how it's even possible to deny it.
Yeah, well, you can't deny the lack of leadership either.
That's true.
You know, that's very true. That definitely contributed to it.
That's very true.
So if you were on a committee with Kamala and Joe in the first 100 days, and maybe they have reached out to you, I don't know. What would your recommendation be? You know, along this same you know, line of thinking, and in this same vein, that would be the most important thing to focus on to help change the narrative in this country.
You have to be able to have an accountability for everyone across the board. It can't be where the police can do whatever they want to do.
Yeah.
It can't be that you have a 0.3 conviction rate of police, right, even that in lethal cases. It can't be that.
Well, that was Steve's criticism in part, right? Because there's a lot of settlements and instead of convictions.
Yes, and my counterpoint was that, okay, we should be able to have both. But the problem is that the police have a license to start with. How do you fix the issue of everybody not being held accountable, of the police not being held accountable, of there being two sets of rules? You can't jump to the trust thing. You have to give us a reason to trust you.
Right. You know, and we haven't even talked about COVID.
I know, right?
It's such a crazy time with COVID, and again, disproportionate number of African Americans dying because of this issue, and probably going to be a disproportionate amount of people not getting the vaccine, if that's something that you believe in. You know, so it's a tough issue.
It's so tough, and there is a reason why the Black community is not comfortable with the notion of vaccinations. You go back to the history of the Tuskegee experiment. You go to you still have a whole lot of doubt in the vaccination because you're telling me that this is okay. We're like, okay, we don't know. You know what I mean? But there's a reason why, and that's because of the history. And when you say things like "Make America Great Again," we're like, okay, when exactly are you talking about? When was it great? Because it wasn't great for us in any period that we could think of. So if you're going back to slavery, that's the part you're talking about? Are you talking about the civil rights and segregation? Are you talking about that? What part can you possibly be talking about? Because for us, it wasn't great at all at any point.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so crazy because the selfishness of people think about when it was great for them.
Right.
Not for anybody else. They're not worried about who it was great for, just great for them. And that has to be taken into consideration when you move forward with everything. So you have to take, you're going back to the police, you have to take into consideration the past of the police. When you go to healthcare, yeah, the past with education, the redlining, everything you have to take into, you can't just skip over it like it never happened and start from here. And that's the problem that so many in America expected to start from where they wanted to start from and just forget about all this stuff that happened here. And you can't do that. You can't do that. Right.
Well, I know you got to go, but share with us real quick the success of your marriage and being a dad. I know that's so important too. Your wife's amazing.
Yes, it's an absolute blessing. My wife Nicole at Syracuse, and we have 3 wonderful kids. Anybody with kids, it's an adventure. I wrote a book on fatherhood, basically, and not from an expert of a perspective of thinking I'm an expert. Literally, a journey. Because anybody that are parents knows that it's a journey every single day. You have ups, you have downs. Things. Sometimes you feel like you're a great parent. Sometimes you feel like you're the worst parents on earth. You know what I mean? Like it's a journey, but it's also such a blessing. And that's the part that is it's the balance of both. That's what parenthood is. So it's definitely a blessing.
Well, you're a blessing to all of us. We appreciate what you're doing. You know, most people probably don't even know who you were as a player. No disrespect, but what you're doing now is so much more important, and teaching you not only your kids, but my daughter knows about you now. It's just
that's great.
Yeah, it's cool, man. It's amazing what you're doing. So much love, mad props, big ups, and thanks for joining us in the Sports Deli, and anything we can do, to like contribute to changing things, generationally and acutely and chronically, we'll do our part. Just let us know.
Appreciate that. Thanks a lot. I appreciate that.
All right. Sounds
good.
Have a good one. All right, you too, man. All right, much love. All right, peace. So we appreciate so much Etan Thomas for joining us here today in the Sports Deli. For Dr. J, I am Hootie Hoot. Remember, you can always send us an email to thesportsdeli@gmail.com, or you can DM us on Instagram @Mike Hootner and on Twitter @Michael Hootner. Please mask up, and remember, Black Lives Matter. Until next time, peace.